On a dark, stormy night about the middle of the 18th century, an anxious group gathered at the seashore near a small village on the west coast in the county of Argyll. In spite of the howling wind and heavy rain, they stood there, eyes seaward, watching a ship in trouble. There was little the villagers could do as they heard the screams of the sailors and the blasting of the minute gun as it was tossed onto rocks. Many on board lost their lives. One of the women at the scene was a widow, along with her 2 daughters, who helped a young sailor who'd been rescued. The widow's cottage was nearby, so they carried him there and cared for him. The widow soon realised she knew his mother, and all 3 accompanied him to his house. They told his mother of the story of the shipwreck and of his survival. Donald Mann's father had died while he was at sea, and his mother was now frail, requiring help on her small craft, so he decided to give up seafaring. He often visited the neighbouring croft where he'd been shown so much kindness, and he was attracted to the widow's 2 daughters, Mary and Barbara. Mary was the eldest of the 2 and was quiet and kind-hearted. She had long fair hair that, when unpinned, fell to her waist. Her sister Barbara was 5 years her junior and was seemingly prettier and more outgoing. Many of the young men admired her, but no one knew who she liked most. However, Barbara had an evil side. Donald Mann fell for Barbara's beauty, but felt Mary was a far better catch, as she was more womanly and homely. By this time his mother was very ill and wanted him to marry before she died, suggesting Mary to be his wife, as she'd known the girl since she was a child. On returning home one evening from the widow's cottage, he found his mother in a chair, seriously unwell. When she recovered slightly, she told her son about a vision she'd had through the second sight. She told him she saw Mary as a happy wife and mother, a blessing and comfort to her husband. But Barbara's future was dark and sinful, and her husband would carry out a terrible crime. She continued that both would perish in a sudden and terrible manner. The woman told her son that she couldn't see the face of either man, but that he should avoid Barbara, as although beautiful, she was a deadly serpent beneath. She asked Donald to promise her that after she died and the mourning period had passed, that he would marry Mary and be a true and faithful husband to her. He promised he would. In due course, Donald did propose to Mary, and she accepted. The couple were married and lived quietly for nearly 3 years. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, but with her mother failing, her still unmarried younger sister came to stay with the young family. Soon Donald was under the charms of the beautiful Barbara, and the 2 began an affair. One lovely summer's day, Donald was working on the croft in full view of the cottage. The door was open, and inside the house, Mary was busy preparing oatcakes, while their collie lay at the door, enjoying both the heat and the smell. Their 2-year-old son was playing on the floor with a kitten, and the baby girl was sleeping in her cradle. Barbara was sitting quietly knitting. After she'd made the oatcakes, Mary told her sister she was going to the rocks to look for some dulse which Donald enjoyed. Her little boy wanted to go with her, but she told him next time. Anxious to get the best dulse, Mary scrambled onto a rock jutting out to the sea, which was always covered at high tide. With her basket full, she sat down to rest, but with the day being so hot, she fell asleep there on the rock. Barbara, meanwhile, was bored, so went to look for her sister, leaving the dog in charge of the children, and soon discovered her. However, as she watched her lying there peacefully, she noticed the tide was coming in, but instead of waking Mary, she hatched a plan to kill her and left her there. She returned to the croft and found Donald, then asked him to accompany her back to the beach, saying she wished to show him something. Arriving at the rock, she pointed out the sleeping Mary, and without a word, fixed her eyes on Donald. Spellbound, he gazed at her until the same cruel idea washed over him. By now the water was within feet of Mary, and they both knew that if they didn't waken her, her life would be taken by the sea. Neither moved. Eventually Barbara hissed through her clenched teeth, "We must not let this chance escape. We must make sure work of it. Come, Donald, help me pleat her hair with the seaweed." And with that, she led the infatuated man towards his devoted wife. Quickly they both undid the pins holding up her hair and allowed her long tresses to flow freely. Still, Mary didn't stir. They then knotted the hair with the seaweed growing on the rock. As they beat a hasty retreat to a vantage point, they watched as the sea finally lapped Mary, and she woke up, startled. She soon found her hair was tangled, and there was no escape from the rock. At that point, Donald had second thoughts. He couldn't bear to see his wife die in such a cruel way, but Barbara, with a scornful smile on her lips, muttered a curse at his cowardice. Mary, meanwhile, could be heard shouting loudly for help as she struggled to free her hair, her hands frantically pulling at it. Then she saw a glimmer of hope, her sister. But instead of running to help, she just stood there and laughed mockingly. Mary realised Barbara was murdering her. Frantically, she called for Donald, but the only voice she heard was her sister's, who called to her that he'd helped to bind her to the rock. She pleaded with Barbara to help her, for the sake of her children if nothing else, but it was to no avail. Soon the water was up to her neck. The next wave washed over her head, and the next drowned her, the murder complete. The death of Mary freed up the lovers, but it didn't go to plan, and things began to go wrong. Donald's harvest failed, his potatoes rotted, his sheep died, and his cows sickened. His neighbours refused to help him following the death of his wife, and he found himself in a deep depression, becoming ever more remorseful for what he'd done. Barbara, not the homely type by nature, grew careless and neglectful, especially as she no longer had feelings for Donald. On the first anniversary of Mary's death, Donald's mood was blacker than ever, and his mother's prophetic warning rang in his ears. After he finished his chores for the day, he retired to the house, but it was no longer a homely, happy place where the lovely Mary had once greeted him. Instead, Barbara was cruel and taunted him whenever he felt remorse for what he'd done. As darkness drew nearer, the air changed. It became oppressive, and soon a thunderstorm raged. The sea swelled, and the waves could be heard crashing violently on the shore. Donald and Barbara retired to bed, but he couldn't sleep. Just before midnight, the storm reached the croft. A loud clap of thunder roared over the house, and when the next flash of lightning lit the room, he saw what he believed was the figure of his murdered wife, standing by his bedside. With a sad but stern voice, she told him, "Your hour has come. Retribution has overtaken you and your partner in guilt at last. I go to protect my beloved offspring." The figure slowly glided into the next room where the two children slept. Another flash of lightning and roll of thunder pealed as the little cottage went up in flames. Almost instantly, the storm ceased. The following morning was clear and calm. The townsfolk checked for any storm damage and eventually found their way to Donalban's croft. They were horror-stricken. One end of the croft had been struck by lightning and was a complete ruin. Under the blackened rafters lay two scorched bodies, Donald and Barbara. The other half of the cottage was unscathed, and when the neighbours entered it, they found the two children locked in each other's arms, sleeping quietly. Mary's murder had been avenged. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.